welcome back to our special segment we like to call the Neurodiverse Couples Coach's Corner. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Stephanie Holmes. And before I reintroduce my co-host and tell you about our guest, I want to tell you a little bit about what you can expect to hear this month. I don't like to call it Autism Awareness Month. If you don't know about autism right now, you've been living under a rock. So I like to call it Autism Acceptance and Move to Action Month. So some of the things that you'll be hearing this month, you will be hearing from a special education advocate that will remind you as a parent of you and your child's rights in the public education system and some of the crazy things that are going on in the education system right now. We'll have Dave here in a moment talking with us on our segment today. You can always rely on just the guys. They'll talk about something interesting when it comes up for their time for their podcast. But you'll also be hearing from Kim Clary. She'll be giving us a wonderful insight into sensory issues, not only as a woman on the spectrum, but as a trained occupational therapist. And then finally, we'll round out this segment with Danny from the cast of Love on the Spectrum. And she'll talk about the importance of believing in your child, their interests, not just seeing them as special restrictive interests, but how to hone those passions into careers. And she is a CEO of Danimation. So with all of that said, thank you for joining us for Coach's Corner. I'm going to pass it to my co-host, Barbara Grant. Barbara, if you'll remind our listeners who you are and then introduce our guest.
Thank you, Stephanie. Always great to be with you. I'm Barbara Grant. I'm a neurodiverse couples coach working internationally, and I specialize in helping people with my roadmap to hope and healing in different phases. And I also work with individuals, either neurotypical, neurodiverse, or even the adult children of the couples I work with. And today we are so excited to have our colleague, David Glick, with us. David is a clinical social worker, licensed. He is the founder of Triad Psych with multiple offices in the greater Atlanta area. And we have been fans of Dave's for many, many months, more months, I think, Stephanie, years.
I got years.
But we're so excited to have you with us today, Dave, to talk about all kinds of things neurodiverse. And Dave, yourself, you are neurodiverse, which you might want to talk about a little bit, how you got into what you do. And introduce yourself, Dave. Tell us more about the wonderful you.
Well, it's very flattering. Thank you. I don't know what to say. I'm grateful. Again, thank you very much. It's very humbling to hear that about me. Where would you like me to begin exactly?
Well, tell us a little bit about maybe your own neurodiversity, when you came to understand that better, and what led you to practice and specialize. I think in many fields of the psych work you do, but you do have a special ability to help people that are neurodivergent.
Yes, I do. Essentially what happened is when you're born to a school and clinical psychologist in New Jersey, like I was, and growing up in the 70s and 80s, you're going to be diagnosed with something. But mom could tell something early on, that the way I was learning, the way I was handling myself, certain challenges I had, that something was up. So for the most part, I carried a label of learning disabled and attention deficit disorder, even before it was called ADD. The original name of ADD was minimal brain dysfunction, MBD.
Wow.
So then it turned into ADD. And a lot of the top minds in the field were in Northern New Jersey, New York City area, and they were my mother's peers and colleagues, so I got to work with some of them too, and they got to author some of their theories on me. And that's how it started. That I've been in the special education system pretty much my whole life in one form or another, either as a student or a consumer or professional. Was one of the first kids to take the SAT untimed back in the 80s too. That was not as common then as it is now. So grew up around a lot of mental health and special education professionals, especially my mom, and made it through college and took a job at a money center bank out of college in 1991. It was simply not for me at all. And I kept saying, well, if I could do it all over, I think I'd go into special education. People thought it was a little crazy at the time. But once, banking made it clear it had no use for David and David had no use for it, I changed directions and decided I wanted to be more like my mother follow in her footsteps. So I went and got a dual degree in special education and social work at Boston University, where I did my undergraduate work. And then my first job in the field was atypical because it was at the Boston University Disability Services Office. So I started out working with adults, not children, which is kind of atypical for special education. So right from Jump Street, I was learning about the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504, reasonable accommodations, of negotiating with professors before I ever stepped foot in a public school classroom. So that was how I entered the field. And it was a great way to enter. And it showed me how broad special education can be. And then combining it with the clinical credential, with the social work credential, has just worked out beautifully for me. I'm 30 plus years into it. And the rest is history. And it just never ceases to amaze me how much more evolution we're seeing, especially around the autism spectrum or neurodiversity. And I think neurodiversity is a much better term because I think people with learning disabilities have a lot in common with people who are on the autism spectrum, but for some reason, 20 years ago, there was some boundary put up that simply shouldn't have been there at all. And someone with ADD has a strong connection to someone who's ASD, and we don't need these boundaries up. It's one neurodiverse umbrella for all of us, I think. That's the latest.
I like that. We're
Go
going to find
ahead.
more and more similarities, I think. I keep thinking like ADHD and autism are really going to end up being cousins and somewhere on the same
They always have
spectrum.
They always are. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
so much overlap. I have not yet met one neurodivergent person who only presents with one DSM silo of criteria and symptoms. Not yet.
for sure.
No,
No.
I haven't either. There are some people who have very strong opinions about whether they should be crossed over or not crossed over, or who had it right, the DSM-4, the DSM-5. So, there are a lot of different opinions out there, but I think the three of us are a little in the same mindset.
It's important to remember the DSM is the most political document there is. And, for me, as someone who's always been in the trenches, getting my hands dirty and muddy, the DSM is very Johnny come lately, that by the time they finally publish something as a disorder, those of us who are in the trenches have known it for a good decade.
Yeah. Or at least, currently we're at 2025 now. The DSM was published currently in 2013, and it was probably written and put through committee already in like 2008. So, we're looking at a document that's almost 20 years old, and the science has leapt ahead with the neuroscience developments that we're seeing, the understanding of brain functionality and neuroplasticity and all kinds of things. So I don't even know. I haven't even heard whether there's going to be a DSM-6. And if so, how do we get on the committee? That's my question.
You got to know people. All right, Dave. So as we were talking before, we were kind of joking. Dave is on to answer some hard questions. And because there's, I think, two really polarizing places out there. I think there's the therapists that are like, oh, we've got to get all neurodivergent people to be more neurotypicalized, and that is kind of ableistic. And then we have some over here in the neurodiversity camp that be like, no skills, no treatments, no helps, like we shouldn't be doing anything. The world should just kind of adapt. And so those two places aren't very functional for anybody. So some of the things that have come up, I was kind of getting some questions. I wanted to talk to you first about kind of fight, flight, freeze, fawning, and how that maybe comes into the pervasive demand avoidance, or as some call it, demand for autonomy. So will you kind of talk us through some of autism and fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and then we'll also kind of morph that into the PDA conversation.
Of course. My training and the way I approach it is that if you're on the spectrum, you're born with PTSD. That what we know is that you have an enlarged amygdala from birth. And the amygdala is the part of your brain that's buried in the bottom center of your brain, which is designed to keep you alive. And that's the fight or flight reaction or the fawn reaction. And it can hijack all the other functions of your brain, your central nervous system, and take control. So if you're neurodiverse, or like we said, especially in the autism spectrum, you already have an enlarged amygdala, so you're going to be hypervigilant on a normal day. even if there is no apparent threat. So, you're born at the very least a nervous wreck to begin with, as my mother would say. So that's, the origin is that you're predisposed to overreact to different stimuli around you. And that's why we as people, we're very careful of the stimuli that we'll allow in. And there's nothing we hate more than when an unwanted stimulus can breach our zone, wherever that may be, and we have to react to it. We don't like being reactive. So that's, where it comes from. Now, we also have, in terms of PDA, that organizing, the executive functioning, different tasks require much more executive functioning. The hardest being writing for most people, is that being called upon to write is a complex neurological task, and that can create additional anxiety and avoidance too.
Okay, so what is the difference? There's this new, well, not new, we're talking about it more, fawning. So the fawning response, how is fawning different from freeze? And does fawning play into PDA?
Well, it depends how the individual decides to react to it, or maybe they're not deciding, they're at the mercy of their central nervous system. So fawning essentially means is you start pleading with the person or the stimulus that's causing the anxiety for it to stop. When you freeze, subconsciously, you're hoping that you'll become invisible and no one will notice you. So it's a bit more of a shutdown state than fawning is. Fawning does involve some bargaining.
Okay. What would you like to kind of follow up with, Barb?
Well, I think, again, we are relationship coaches. And so we're interested in how these triggers hijack relationship. And there is the perception of, PDA and even rejection sensitive dysphoria, which is also not in any DSM descriptive criteria, but this idea of I'm having a strong reaction to a sense of rejection or somebody asking me to give up my autonomy. These strong reactions, I think they're related. What would you say is, and we talked a little bit before coming on the podcast, are effective interventions for helping individuals who are so mightily triggered to, first of all, understand their opportunity to better self-regulate? Is that even possible? There are schools of thought that no, that can't be met. That's how their brain works. That's what they're going to do. Versus interventions that I know children have ABA, but adults aren't going for ABA treatments. They're going to therapists or coaches to look at how they can improve their self-regulation, whether it's PDA or RSD, and how that can benefit their relationship skills. So what do you have to share about that?
Well, I strongly believe, and I always will believe, that all behaviors are learned. Now, granted, your central nervous system is playing in there and certain behaviors come more easily, but all behaviors are learned. And if you've learned one behavior, you can learn a new behavior, and you can also learn a replacement behavior. So leveraging that is key. I mean, that's why people come to see me, is, they don't know that when they come in, that all behaviors are learned, but they want to learn a new behavior to replace a behavior that's causing them problems. So, a clinician coach will analyze what's going on. And, that I analyze all behavior within the environment it occurs, because behavior is very dependent on environment. So one of the key, you have to ask the key questions: that is this happening across all environments? Is it happening in one specific environment? Is it correlating with something else? And once we get the data to look at when the behavior is occurring, we get a lot of insight. Then it's about taking that insight and either modifying the environment or modifying the reaction. And again, or maybe it's a combination of both, but it's very important that healthy people, whether they're on the spectrum or not, are not what's known as self-playing pianos, that they have to be able to play more than one song. Now, younger people listening won't know what a self-playing piano is, but it's this old piano with a piece of paper in it, and you crank it up, and it only
player pianos. Yeah.
Right. It was used for silent movies because they're designed to match it. So, I mean, think about if I have a self-playing piano that can only play the music for Jaws, and then I show you Mary Poppins, you're going to feel a little uncomfortable and a little weird with the images you're seeing and what you're hearing. And that's where not just my neurodiverse patients, but all my patients can get into trouble if the visuals aren't matching the music. We want to make sure and they can do it. So what we're doing is looking for the correlates of the behavior. Does it involve a particular person? Does it involve a particular situation or a particular place? So once we start asking a lot of the, what and why questions, we then come up with a plan.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Well, just as you're talking about that, I'm thinking of a client that I've worked with several years now. He's ADHD, meaning Asperger's as well as, or autism as well as ADHD. And older guy, he's in his late mid 60s. And he would lose it. I mean, just totally dysregulate with anxiety and reactivity. Whenever three things, he was going to fly on an airplane, he was at the boat ramp trying to get his boat launched, or he was watching somebody violate a crossing a section where somebody entered the crosswalk, and he would actually stop his car and yell at the other drivers for having violated the cross. He and his family was just aghast. So I taught him something simple like box breathing, and he has become a box breathing expert. And he called me after a recent trip to say, Barbara, on the limo ride to the airport, I did box breathing. In the plane, I did box breathing. He had a Xanax too, but he did box breathing. And he did it all the way through. And he said, it totally kept me calm and regulated. And he was focused on not letting his fight, flight, freeze, fawn, amygdala trigger run away with him. So something else I know is true, and Stephanie, you've probably heard this, is that sometimes when you say who is triggering you or what is triggering you, the situation, many of the neurotypical partners sometimes will say, all I did was ask a question. I wasn't angry. I didn't disrespect. I didn't say anything negative. I asked a question and I got this big reaction. And so when you say learned behaviors, is it possible that a learned behavior like feeling rejected or needing to defend yourself or feeling somebody's trying to control you can be then projected onto somebody who's really not triggering you anymore, but is reminding you that you're triggerable. And now you're having this disproportionate reaction to something that really is a neutral stimuli. So what do you hear me saying? Yeah.
Of course, it's highly possible you're going to ask the key questions, like who's asking this to you? Why is it so triggering for you? Or making the statement to you? Is it happening at work? I worked on a case where this man prided himself on being a back office guy. He was the master of the back office, and he created a really blazing, smashing career for himself because, most people see the back office as something to pass through and get out of, whereas he made it clear, I am a back office guy now and forever. That's why I like it. Was very good at it. But one reason he told me he liked it was that he didn't have to really talk to or deal with people, which is another code for emotional variance. But he got a new boss who was going to ask, really key questions, which were very jolting for him and him getting upset. And I said, look, your boss gets to ask you questions, but I'm not used to it. I like to be left alone. That's how I've made my name in the business. So, with him, I had to, ask key questions. I mean, is the boss responsive? Do you feel he's doing good things for you, for the company, for your operation? And he was so focused on being jolted, the anxiety of being asked questions and probing questions and focus questions, that he forgot to ask what I just said. And when he paused, he said, something, he really is doing good things. And whenever I've told him I could do better if I have something, he always gives it to me. And I said, why is this so jolting? It's just he's just not really used to it. Then, furthermore, what I explained to him was that your new learned behavior is you're an expert and a master on back office operations. That, those of us who are neurodiverse, when we like something, we have to know everything there is to know about it. And it can be the most obscure, weird thing, but that's just who we are. And I said to him, there's no need to be jolted because your knowledge base is so good. And, you know, and how, you know, when you have a performance review, you know, which was coming up, how does the boss feel about you? And he didn't know, and he was too nervous to ask, but he got a glowing review, glowing. But what I explained to him is that there's something called a command presence, which is talked about quite a bit in the military, talked about quite a bit in police work, the legal field too. And so I once asked the widow of one of my mentors who had the most amazing command presence you ever felt in your life. I said, you know, why would you walk into the room and just stop and feel it? He wasn't physically intimidating at all. And she said, oh, that's easy. He was so smart about the areas he was expert in that he had complete confidence. And that's what people picked up on. And I explained this to the client that you're very expert in this. Let people ask all the questions they want, because you'll answer them better than anyone wants. So in that respect, it was more cognitive therapy, a little bit of behavior therapy to give them a new perspective on what's happening, to got to a point where they learn to enjoy it.
Excellent.
Right.
So how long did it take him to actually implement the new behavior, you know, remembering to do the thought process and learning to kind of subdue the trigger for just feeling freaked out anxiety?
Very fast. That, you know, speaking as someone who is neurodiverse, you give us the right software, we're going to run with it. And if it works for us, we're going to keep repeating it and enhancing it and making it better. We're addicted to the things that reduce our anxiety. We're addicted to the things that reduce our sensory overwhelm.
Yeah.
Once we get a taste of it, we want more and more and more and more.